Hello, and welcome to Creating, Scheduling, and Running an Event. My name is Benjamin Wolf. I'm the manager of SRGA Enablement for Golf Genius Software, and I'll be taking you through the training today. To get started, let's first look at a quick agenda. We'll be covering key concepts and terminology to start off. There's some very important terminology and concept differences between the TPP platform and the USGA Tournament Management platform that we want to lay out ahead of time. Then we'll move into event setup and flow. We'll talk about navigation of the product. Now it's important today to note that in this training session, we'll be creating an event with one round with one tournament. This is a very basic setup. This session today will familiarize you with navigating the product and get you introduced to some of the terminology differences. So let's go ahead and jump into key concepts and terminology and introduce a few of those right now. You can see on this first slide, we have the basic event structure. At the very top, we have the event itself. This is the equivalent of the tournament in TPP. In the tournament management product, the event holds the rounds, and those rounds either have tournaments within them or across multiple rounds. So we have an event with rounds, and those rounds can have single round tournaments within them or multi-round tournaments across multiple rounds. To look at a real-world example of what this looks like, here we have your typical member guest. The member guest is the event, and this event has 3 rounds in it. Each of those rounds has skins that live within the one round, but it also has a round-robin match that aggregates points across multiple rounds. So the key takeaway here is we have an event. The event has rounds, and those rounds have tournaments, either within them or across multiple rounds. Moving on to some other terminology differences, we have divisions and flights. Now this is a pretty basic concept for most people, but just to make sure everyone's on the same page, I want to go through them. We have divisions, which is a way to separate groups of players to score them separately. Now a player or a team can be a part of one or more divisions, and there can be one or more divisions within an event. The equivalent terminology in TPP for a division was flight group. The divisions then house the flights. Within a division, you can flight the players. And again, a flight is to separate players into different groups for scoring. The key difference here between a division and a flight is because a flight lives within a division, a player or a team can only be in one flight within that division. Here's a real-world example of our event, a parent-child championship, having 2 divisions, boys and girls, and those divisions being flighted by age. So again, the key takeaway here is that we have different divisions that are then flighted. And a player can live in one or more divisions, but it can only live within one flight within a division. Now let's move on to player rosters. There are several player rosters we need to talk about when we look at the USGA Tournament Management product. At the highest level is the Master Roster. The Master Roster is a golden list of all the players within a club or an association that could possibly play in their events. An example of this at the club level may be the GIN Player Roster. We have the ability in the Tournament Management product to simply import the GIN Player Roster for a club as the Master Roster. The next level of roster would be the event roster, which is simply a list of all the players within an event. The event roster could be pulled from players from the master roster, or it could be loaded separately. And then we have the round roster. Again, this is a subset of the event roster, which is a subset of the master roster, so we're paring it down as we go. The round roster is simply a list of all the players within one round of an event. Now, in a lot of cases, the round roster is the exact same as the event roster because all the players play in each round. But if you think of a league with multiple rounds each week over the course of a season, you may have different players each week, so the round roster will vary from the league roster. Now, to look at how we can populate these rosters, let's first look at the master roster. Here you can see we can upload a spreadsheet to populate this roster. We can pull in from GIN. Just as I said before, we can import a club's GIN roster right into their master roster. And then we can also use manual entry, simply typing in the information for a player. The next roster we have is the event roster. Now, how do we populate the event roster? Well, we can pull in players from the master roster. We could pull in all or some of the players from the master roster to create our event roster. However, we can also use these same methods to import players to the event roster. We can upload a spreadsheet, for example, an outside event coming to a club. We would simply upload the spreadsheet to create the event roster. We could import players via GIN, whether that be through GIN number lookup or last name lookup. We could also use manual entry to simply type in the names. Now, one thing you may note that's slightly different than the default setting in TPP is this arrow from the master roster to the event roster. I want you to particularly pay attention to the arrow. There is no arrow coming back from the event roster to the master roster. This is because there is no pushback of player information from the event roster back to the master roster. The default setting in TPP was that every player in every event roster was then pushed back to the master player list. This is not the case in USGA Tournament Management. In the new product, the event roster is a standalone roster. Any players added to the event roster will be there and not pushed back to the master roster. So if you would need to add players to a master roster that were playing in an event, you would need to go add those separately to the master roster. Now, this is done on purpose because we want that master roster to continue to be a golden list of players. Too often in TPP, that master player list became muddled with thousands or tens of thousands of different players from all the events at a club over the years and years. That list is no longer really usable. So the master roster in USGA Tournament Management is to be that golden list, that pared down list of only the players who play in your events most often. In the case of most clubs, this will simply be their GIN player roster. That's already a list of players who play at their club most often. Now, once we have our event roster, we can then begin to build our round rosters. As I said, the round roster may be exactly the same as the event roster in the case of a member or a member guest. However, in weekly league play for a men's association or a league at a public golf course, the round roster may vary on a weekly basis. Now let's talk about event setup flow. How does an event get set up and what steps are necessary to go through? I've broken event setup down into 4 basic areas: pre-event prep, then check your work, then game day, and finally post-round wrap-up. Now within each of these sections, we have work to do. So in pre-event prep, we'll create our event, we'll edit the settings for that event, and we'll edit the website for that event. Then we'll add our players, we'll add our rounds, we'll create teams if necessary, and we will not talk about teams today, but in subsequent training sessions we will. Remember, today's training is 1 event with 1 round and 1 tournament, just to familiarize you with the product. So once we add our rounds, we'll then create our pairings and we'll add our tournaments. Once we've done all this, we're actually ready then to check our work. To help you check your work in the tournament management product, we've included a few different tools. One of those is pre-play audit. The pre-play audit will catch any irregularities we see in your event setup. So a good example of this would be creating teams and then not creating a tournament to use those teams. In this case, when you ran the pre-play audit, we would say you've created teams but you don't have a tournament using those teams. Is this a mistake? So you would at least be presented with the information to see if you've made an error. The second tool is the handicap analysis page. I'll show you this page later when we go through the setup, but this is one of my favorite pages in the program. This page gives you the step-by-step mathematical breakdown of every handicap calculation. It allows you to really thoroughly check the work of calculating handicaps. And finally, we have random scores. Random scores is probably the best way to check that everything you've done actually works properly. We input a random gross hole-by-hole score for each player in the field, and then show you the leaderboards scored and paid out as if those players had just played. There's really no better way to make sure that everything you've set up works properly than using random scores. So once we've done all that and we know that everything is correct, we'll move into game day. We'll print our materials, we'll enter scores, we'll complete the round, and we'll view our leaderboards. All of that happens either just prior to or on the day of. And then we'll move into post-round wrap-up, where we'll verify the results are correct, and then we'll publish them. And I'll have a couple different ways to show you how to publish those results. Now, briefly before we move into the actual tournament management product, I'd just like to show you a little bit on navigating the product. We have 3 general areas you'll use, and we'll show you all 3 of these today. The first is golfgenius.com. This is where we'll go to get logged into our account. Once we're logged in, we'll be in the manager site. All of the administration of events happens in the manager site. We administer our account, such as default settings and master roster. We can create new events and edit already created events. All of that administration side happens in the manager site. Now, as you may know, each event you create gets its own website. And so that's the third navigation area. And we'll go there when we create our event. So you'll see the event website and how to navigate to it and back to the manager site. So to get started, let's start by navigating to golfgenius.com, and we'll get logged in. Now that I'm logged in, you'll see I'm in the Customer Center. This Customer Center is always accessible by clicking on this link in the top right-hand corner. This Customer Center link will be on any page within the Manager site. Here in the Customer Center, I have the ability to edit my customer settings. These are my account default settings, my default website, any of the golf courses I'd like to edit, and things like that. We have the ability to add or update our master roster, or do any work we need there, as well as many other functions. Today we will not be exploring the Customer Center, but creating an event. So let's go ahead and create our event. Now if you notice on the left-hand side of the screen, I've added the checklist from that event setup flow chart that I had earlier. We will follow this from the top down to keep us on track as we move through the training. So first let's create our event. We'll name our event and then we'll click Get Started. The very first page we come to is the Event Setup Wizard. This walks you through adding golfers, adding rounds to the calendar, editing the profile for this event, choosing your golf course, and editing your website. This is a wonderful tool for the first few times you set up an event. In fact, we have lots of customers that still use this every time they create an event. I'm not going to use it today because I want to show you where all of these items are in the product itself. So here we are in the event dashboard. If we move to our list, we can see the second item is Edit Event Settings. So I'll start in the top left corner and I'll go to Edit Event Profile. Here in the event profile, we have many settings we can edit, such as the name of the event, the way names are formatted, player separators on the leaderboard, a default gender for players in this event, and many others. I'm going to walk through a few important ones just to highlight them, but I highly recommend that you at least look through each one of these items the first few times you set up an event, just to make sure that everything is set up correctly. The first item I'd like to highlight is under the Handicap Settings tab. Here under Compute Course Handicaps Based On. This section allows us to customize how we're applying Section 3-5 from the Handicap System Manual to calculate handicaps in our tournaments. So you can see here I have Section 3-5 turned on, and I currently have it set to adjust as few players as possible. We could set this to adjust the higher rated tees or adjust only the lower rated tees. In each of these cases, we would take either the lowest rated tee as the unadjusted or the highest rated tee as the unadjusted tee, and we would adjust all other tees off of that unadjusted tee. Now we can also set a fixed unadjusted tee. This is used widely at clubs that have a set member tee for their events. You set the member tee as the fixed unadjusted tee, and then the back tees would be adjusted up and the forward tees adjusted down accordingly. For our purposes, we'll leave it on Adjust Fewest Players. On the Rounds and Scheduling tab, I'd like to show you how to set 5-somes or 6-somes. Simply check the box and save, and when you go to create pairings, you'll have the ability to create 5-somes or 6-somes. For our example here, we'll use 4-somes. But just know this is where you adjust these settings to turn it on. In the Tournaments and Scoring tab, we do give you the option of how you would like to enter scores. The default is to enter scores for each hole, but you can also enter 9-hole totals or 18-hole totals. Entering 18-hole totals would be very useful in the case of an outside event playing a 4-man gross scramble. It may not be necessary in that case to enter all of the hole-by-hole scores for each group. It would be much faster just to enter the 18-hole totals and get a ranking. For our example today, we'll use for each hole, and we'll enter gross hole-by-hole scores. Now the last tab is this Directories tab. Here you can see I have a few different directories already set up, and I can add this event to each of these directories if I like. Now an event can live in one or more directory. A directory is simply a way to group similar events that may be useful to a certain group of people, so that you could then link to a directory on your club or association website, and those players would only be viewing the pertinent information to them, such as the juniors only viewing the junior events. Or if this was a couples event, we could put it in the men's and women's directories, so both men and ladies would see it. We have men and women in this event today, so we'll go ahead and check those, and we'll save our settings. Now that we've completed editing the event settings, let's move on to editing the event website. Here in the event dashboard, we'll move to the Apps menu, and we'll click on the address for the member portal. The member portal is another way that we say member website or player website. So as you can see here, I already have a banner and a background image set. These were pulled in from my default website settings that I set up in my Customer Center. To edit this website, first let's go to one of the menus and click on General Portal Settings. Here we can change the coloring of the website. We can also change the background image. We can change the opacity of the page itself. We can set a flash message, which simply scrolls across the top of each page. This can be very useful to relay information to the players or the spectators in an event, such as "Congratulations, Joe, on the hole-in-one on number 8. We can also rearrange the menu items by clicking and holding and dragging a menu item to reorder it. Once we have the order we like and all the settings we like, we'll click Save. Now let's talk about each of these menus. These menus are called sections. You'll see here on the right side we can edit a section. Editing a section allows us to rename it. For instance, if we don't want this named Results, we can change it to Leaderboards. We can also reorder the pages that live within this section, and then save it. Now let's talk about editing the pages. Here's the pairings page. As you can see right now, there's no information to display. But if we come to Edit, we'll see all of the different information that we can display on the pairings page. Now each page you edit will have different settings based on the content it has to display. But each of the pages you look at will have this header box at the top, so let's talk about these checkboxes. The first checkbox at the top is Public Page. If we check the box, we then make this page public and viewable by anyone on the internet. Now they would still need the link to this website, but once they were here, they could view the information on this page. If we have it unchecked, this means it's a private page. A private page can only be viewed if the person is logged in some manner. This could be with a username and a password, or simply using a GGID. A GGID is a Golf Genius ID number. Each event has a GGID, and the GGID can be distributed to players or spectators so they can view private pages on the event website. The next checkbox is Splash Page. By checking the Splash Page checkbox, we then have said we want this to be the page that the players or spectators land on when they come to this website. It's the home page for this event. Because it's the home page, you can only have one page selected for the splash page at a time. The splash page can be used to your advantage as the event progresses. An example of this is a best practice we've seen with some current customers who use the splash page before an event as an agenda for the week's events. Once the event has pairings, they then make the pairings page the splash page. During the play of the event, they make the leaderboard the splash page. And finally, after the event, they either make it the leaderboard page or sometimes a photo page or a results page that they've compiled. You can hide a page as well by checking the hidden page checkbox. Just as the splash page can evolve throughout the course of an event, there may be pages with information you don't need to show at certain times. So an example of this would be this pairings page. Before an event has pairings, we could hide the pairings page because there's nothing to show. The last checkbox is Include in TV display. If we check this box, the pairings list would then be shown in the TV display as it rotated through the leaderboards. This can be especially helpful before an event, as the players may be looking to see when their starting time is. Now down here below are some settings that pertain specifically to the pairings page. Make sure you read all of the settings on each page to see just how flexible they are and how you'd like them set up. Each of the pages on this website will have different settings, so make sure you click Edit on each to see exactly how they work. Now that we've talked about the event website, let's navigate back to the Manager site. If we head to this menu in the top right corner, we can click on Return to Manager site to get back to administering the event and setting it up. So the fourth item on our list is to add players. Amazingly enough, to add players, we go to the Golfers tab. In the Golfers menu, we'll click on the very first item, Import Golfers from Master Roster, GIN, or other places. So here on this page, we have the different ways to import players, and here below, we have the current players in our event roster. Let's go ahead and import from our master roster. We'll use this quick search to add Adele, and we'll click Add Player. If we type, we'll see it filter as we type, and when we're satisfied with who is highlighted, we can hit Enter, and it adds them to the list. Another way to add players would be to select from the entire master roster. Here we're presented with a list of the entire master roster with checkboxes for each player. I'm going to go ahead and scroll down to add a number of players to this event. We'll eventually get to 100, but let me import these 97 right now. Now as this processes, you'll see this page called Tip of the Day. We'll talk more in depth about this page later, but just know that any item that needs to process in the background will show you a tip of the day along with the status of that item. Now that this is completed, we see the check mark, and we're back to our import page where we can see the entry number of the players, and if we scroll to the bottom, we'll see we have 99 players in our event. As I said earlier, we'll get to 100, but I'll show you another way to add a player on the fly later when we get to pairings. Now that we've added our players, let's go ahead and add a round. We do that in the Calendar tab by clicking on Add Rounds. So now that I'm in this page, I can click on a date to add a round. If I'd like to add another round, I can click on another date. To delete a round, I click on it again and click Delete. Now we can add multiple rounds to the same date by clicking on it again and clicking OK, and then it's in red to show multiple rounds on that date. If you remember, for our purposes, we'll be creating one round today. We'll create that on Monday the 13th of November, and we'll click Save. Again, this is a background process that has to run, and so we see the tip of the day. Now this page we've been taken to is called the tabular view of the calendar. Basically, it's a spreadsheet view of all the rounds in the calendar. We only have one round, so it's not that impressive. But imagine if you had a 40-week men's association, and how many rounds that would be, and how difficult it would be to maintain the information for those. Here we would list out all 40 rounds for that men's association, and it would be very easy to change the date by clicking on a date. We could change the name of a round very easily by just clicking on it, and a few other options. Now that we have our round, and we don't need to create teams, let's go create our pairings. So if you remember, we've worked from left to right, and now we're in the Rounds tab. So in the Rounds menu, There's one thing I need to point out before we move any further, and that's this Select a Round drop-down menu. As I just said, we only have one round, so it defaults to having that one round selected. Again, imagine if we had a list of 40 rounds in a men's association and how long this drop-down would be, and we would need to make sure we were editing the proper round. It's very important to have the correct round selected in this drop-down menu, because anything we do in the Rounds tab only affects the one round we have selected. So if we've chosen the best ball round and we create pairings, we're only creating pairings for this round, even if we had 5 other rounds in this event. So now that we have our round selected, let's create new pairings. The first way I want to show you to create pairings is manual pairings. Everyone's done this before, where you check off your 4 players, you click Create Foursome, and you do this continually till you've made it through the entire field. However, I don't want to take all the time to create pairings manually. I would like the system to know how to create my pairings for me. So let's go to Automatic Scheduling. Here I have some ways I can create pairings, such as random, AB pairs, ABCD foursomes, or simply by index. You can see I have a few options for teams, but they're grayed out because I didn't create teams yet. We'll be pairing randomly, but let's set some keep together rules. So for example, I know Annette has Barbara in town as a guest, and we can set them to be kept together. So even though the system will be randomly pairing the players, Annette and Barbara will remain together. Now, we can also set spread apart rules. I think all of us have been in some situations where we have 2 players who cannot, under any circumstances, ever play together. So in this case, Alan and Andrew had a bad business deal. We need to keep them separated. So we'll create random pairings, but they'll be random except Alan and Andrew will never play with each other. Now, an important thing to note here for random pairings. In the case of a league, we will keep track of all of the pairings for all of the previous rounds. And if you tell us to create random pairings, we will create random pairings based on how many times each player has already played with the other players. So this is a great way for a men's league or a ladies association to balance who has played with whom over the course of an entire year, and we'll automatically do that for you. Now here in our event, we'll create our pairings randomly. We set a couple rules. Let's click Next and Continue to get those pairings created. Again, we're presented with a tip of the day while the system processes these pairings and creates them for us. Once it is finished creating the pairings, we'll be taken to the Edit Existing Pairings page. Here on the Edit Existing Pairings page, we have functions on the left side that affect the players, and we have functions on the right side that affect the course and tee and times. So let's start on the right side. You can see we already have a golf course and a tee box assigned for each player. If we hover over a player, we can see exactly the tee box they've been assigned to. This happened because in our course details, we said men's default tee is blue and women's default tee is red. Because we had men and women in this event, and we only had one golf course selected to use, these were applied automatically for us. Now if we need to change this, we can click on Set Course and Tee. Let's say we really want the men to play the green tee. So I'll choose the green tee, I'll select all the players, sort them into the males, and click Go to assign all the male players to the green tee. Now I can certainly still select a few players individually to set to a different tee box. We'll set these 4 women to the women's white tee and click Go. Now that I have my course and tees set, I can set my shotgun or tee times. So let's set tee times for this event. Any of the green boxes can be clicked in and edited, but let's go ahead and let the system apply the tee times for us. We'll have a noon start for the first tee time, an interval of 10 minutes starting on hole number 1, and click Go. And you can see 12, 12:10, 12:20, all starting on hole number 1. So now that our tee times are applied, I'm going to save. And we'll move to the left side of this page. The players are on the left side, and therefore we have buttons to affect the players. So for example, we can swap a foursome. Let's say that I forgot that in Anne's group we have the club president, and they need to tee off first. So we'll click on Anne's group, we'll click on Arthur's group, and we'll click Go to swap those foursomes. Now my threesome is in the fourth slot, and Anne's group is first. I can also move foursomes around. So for example, I would like to move that fourth foursome into a different position. So I'll move them before foursome number 2, in which case the arrow points to where the foursome will go. I click Go, and I've moved my threesome back up into the 12-10 slot. Now in some cases, we don't need to swap entire foursomes, we just want to swap players around. So again, in that first foursome, I realize the club president, Alex, is in the second position, and I need him to be in the first position. So all I did was click on the Alex, click on Anne, and they swap. Again, I'll do that one more time so you can see it. Now if this was a pairs event, I need to make sure that if I'm swapping players around, that both players go together. So for instance, Alan and Alan here need to swap with Aiden and Alan. So I'll click on the first two, I'll click on the second two, and both those pairs swap. Very useful in a pairs event to make sure you're swapping the correct players around. Now let's say we have some players add, and I need a new row, I need another foursome. So I'll click New Row, and I can then swap players into that row if needed. And I can also add players to be filled in. So now I need to fill out this foursome with the gentleman who just walked up. Now if I click on Add Players and I click on the empty slot, you'll see that gentleman's not in my event roster yet. So let's click on New Golfer. We'll add his name, and we'll click Save. He's then in our list, and we can click on the spot to add him in. Now, at the bottom of our pairings, we have a few empty slots, and we don't have players to fill these in. So let's click on Add Blinds. Now I know at the association level, adding a blind is not a very common thing. But at the club level, we add blinds all the time to fill out foursomes for scoring purposes. So the first thing to do is click on the empty slot, and then choose the player you'll be adding in as the blind. You'll see that player comes in with brackets around their name, because they're not actually in this foursome. We are simply pulling in their scores for scoring purposes. So now that we've edited all our pairings, let's click Save. Now that we've finished creating our pairings, let's go add a tournament. So again, in the Rounds menu, we have Create Edit Tournaments. We'll click on Add Tournament, and in this case, we'll be creating a very simple setup. In fact, the system defaults to what we'll be setting up: a stroke play, player versus the field, on their own ball for 18 holes, net at 100% handicap. The only thing we need to do is decide how we would pay it out. We'll pay out $150 for first, $100 for second, and $50 for third. We could also assign points if we'd like. Then we can name it Individual Net and click Save. Now at this point, we've done everything we need to do in pre-event prep. We're ready to check our work. So let's head to the Rounds tab, and we'll move to Pre-Play Audit of Round. These are some simple tools that run to make sure what we've set up makes sense to the program. Everything we've done is passed. But if we had done something that the system thought may be incorrect, we would either get a warning or an error here, and be directed where to fix it. Now that our pre-play audit has checked out, let's go to the handicap analysis page. So in the Rounds menu on the right side, we have the handicap analysis. Now as I said before, this is one of my favorite pages in the entire system. I'm a big handicap dork, and I love seeing all the math to get all these numbers. So first we can see that men are capped at 36.4 for index, and we can see that the unadjusted tee is actually the women's red tee. So if we look at a woman playing the red tee, it's a very simple calculation, right? We took the index, we calculated the handicap based on the slope and we get to 56 for Angela. Now a man on the green tee has a different calculation, because here at the bottom you can see that section 3-5 is being applied. Now it's applying as a 0 because it's only 0.2 strokes different. But if we would look at a woman playing the white tee, we'll see it's actually a 3-stroke difference. So Angela has a 22.5. She's playing a 141 slope, which gets us to 28.07. So we round that to 28, and we then apply section 3-5, which gets her to a 31. Now I don't know about you, but I've had plenty of players in my face yelling at me because their handicap is wrong, and I would have loved to have this tool in years past to show them the exact steps I've taken to calculate their handicap. This is a great tool for you to use, not only to check your work, but also to show a player that their handicap has been calculated correctly. So now that we've checked the handicaps, let's move on to random scores. So again, in the Rounds tab, we can come to Enter Scores. Now this is the page we would normally enter all the scores into the day of the event. But to check our work, we can click on Random Scores. This then presents us with the option to test the leaderboard after it's filled in a hole-by-hole score for all the players. So we'll click on Test Leaderboard, and again, it's going to go away and process the leaderboard to make sure everything is scored correctly, and once it's done, we'll be presented with the leaderboard page and we can see the results. So here on the leaderboard page, we can see that our individual net tournament has been scored. We can see that Barbara won it with a negative 56 net, outstanding, a 19 total net, and she was awarded the $150. Now, most people would say, minus 56, let's take a look at that. So if you click on the player, you can actually see the hole-by-hole scoring. So in this case, we have Barbara, a 54 handicap, who shot a gross 73, therefore has a net 19. Now this example is a little extreme, but you get the point. We can look at a player to check the hole-by-hole scoring rack. Now we do have the ability to click Expand All. This will give you your traditional hole-by-hole leaderboard look for the entire field. Now that we've checked our work and we made sure our event setup is correct, we can head back to the Enter Scores page. The Enter Scores page says, hey, you have random scores in right now. What would you like to do with them? We'll clear the random scores so that we're ready to play on game day. So now that we've finished checking our work and we know everything is set up correctly, we're ready to print our materials. Let's head to the Rounds menu and we'll click on the Download Print Center. Here in the Download Print Center, we've organized all the materials you'll need to print. So starting on the top left, we can print T-sheets, alpha lists, and actually a combined alpha T-sheet. This is an alphabetical listing and a T-sheet listing of all the players in the field, up to 144 players on one side of one piece of paper. This is an extremely useful tool for your staff on the day of an event, and I highly recommend trying to utilize it. There are lots of ways to customize it, and we will actually look at that in our next training session. Here down below, we have the ability to print cart signs, proximity markers, hole location sheets, as well as our Page Composer and Report Composer. The Page Composer allows us to create things such as custom cart signs, bag labels, locker tags, etc. And the Report Composer allows us to create Raguzzi sheets, pace of play charts, any type of tabular reporting we would need. Maybe a multi-round T-sheet, things of that nature. So any document you need to create can be created in these two composers. What I want to focus on today is our scorecard composer. So let's click on Print Scorecards. Now the first thing to do when we go to print our scorecards is to choose the tournament we'll be dotting the card with. Because this event only has one net tournament, we've automatically chosen it for you. Next, we need to decide which groups we'd like to print scorecards for. We could uncheck a few groups if we didn't need to print them, and we can also print a couple blank scorecards if needed. Let's move on to the Format tab. Anytime we're editing the scorecard, we'll see a preview of it here down below. So this is what the current scorecard looks like. We have the ability to change the type of card we're printing. For example, there's a 9-hole scorecard. We can also change the size of the paper we're printing on. There are several of our customers who print one scorecard at a time, and they need to enter a custom size. We allow for that. Now we also allow you to choose how many scorecards fit on a page for you, as well as who you'll be printing on the scorecard. Now I'd like to point out these header rows here on the top of the scorecard. If we click inside of them, you'll see we have many placeholders for specific information that we can use here. So for example, we don't need flight name in this case, but maybe we do need starting hole. So I'll type in the word starting hole so that appears on every scorecard, but I'll use the placeholder called hole so that each scorecard that prints has the proper hole for the players who are starting on that card. Utilize these to pull in specific information to your scorecard for each group so that the proper information is displayed. Now in the Handicap Stroking tab, we have the ability to turn off total handicaps and dots. This can actually be useful in the case of, let's say, a 6-6-6 tournament. We may have 6 holes of best ball, 6 holes of scramble, 6 holes of alternate shot, in which case showing the total handicaps on a per player basis doesn't make a lot of sense because we have some handicaps that are team handicaps like a scramble or alt shot, but then some that are individual handicaps like a best ball. So we can simply uncheck that box. In our case, with our individual net stroke play, we can leave the dots on the card. Now in additional info and teas, there's a few things I do want to show because they're very useful. We can add pace of play to the scorecard. Now when I did this, you'll see this warning here that says, the scorecard is now too tall and I can no longer print 2 on a page. So I may need to adjust the settings of my scorecard to make sure I can print 2 per page in landscape. Now I can move my pace of play up or down where I need it. I like mine at the top of the page. And we can also move our tees around if we would need to. Now you'll see we have 3 tees being played. I only have a few women on the women's white tee, so I'm going to uncheck that. And now you can see I can now print 2 cards per page again. My scorecard now fits. Now we can add logos. Here we can add the primary logo or the secondary logo or any other logo we like. We can also add a watermark on the left side and the right side, and we can have control over what those watermarks look like. So we can resize them, we can change the opacity of them, and we can move them around. Last but certainly not least, we have font and color control. We can choose any line of the scorecard by checking a box here to select the whole line, and we can change certain attributes, such as the height of the lines. You can see now I've exceeded the height. I can no longer print 2 per page. So now I'll change it back to 20 and we're good to go. Now you can also select individual boxes on the scorecard and change, let's say, the background color of that box. For now, I'll go ahead and click Save and Print, and we'll get to process and create these scorecards. Now I told you I would talk about this tip of the day, and let's do that now. While any document processes, we'll show you a tip of the day. These are different short tips of the day that rotate through and tell you about different formats to play. This one's a helpful hint on how to create and edit user-scored tournaments. Once our document has processed, we see our green checkbox and we get the ability to download the PDF. When we do that, we get a new tab in our browser and we get the PDF of our scorecard. From this window, we can save the PDF to our computer, or we can just print it right from here. As you can see, the scorecards have been created and they look great, and all of the correct information is displayed for each group. When we're done printing, we'll simply close the tab and click Back. This takes us back to the scorecard editor, where we can make any changes we need. Now that we've printed our materials, let's go and enter scores for our event. So head to the Rounds menu and back to that Enter Scores page. And here we can enter the gross hole-by-hole scores for each player. So if we click on the first foursome, you'll see we have two scoring areas. The first one is where we type in the scores. You'll see 654, 456. Now as I typed those in, you see below we have a net scoring preview. What this allows us to do is when we have finished scoring a player, we then see their 9-hole gross and their 18-hole gross totals, but we also see the net based on the tournament we've selected in the menu at the top. Again, this event has one net tournament, so we've pre-selected it. So now we can finish entering the scores for our players. As you can see, it simply tabs to the next hole's score as I do this. And there we have it. We have all our scores entered. We can quickly check their net scores, and we can click Done to save those score entry. Now, for time's sake, I'm going to go ahead and use random scores again to populate all the scores for this 100-player field. And then we can go to the leaderboard. So we'll go to Rounds, Display Leaderboard. Since we've edited the scores, the leaderboard needs to process again, and it does that, and then we'll be taken to the leaderboard page where we can review the results. Now, since we entered scores and we went to the leaderboard page, you'll see here in the rounds menu, the round status has moved to completed. So now we can check our results. We can verify them. If we click on individual net, we'll see, again, Barbara won, probably because she's a 65 handicap. However, we can check any scores we need to. We can expand this to view the entire field, hole by hole, all the way down to the last place person, and we can view any information we need. Now at the top, because we had some purse payouts, we'll see a player purse summary so that we know exactly how much money each player has won. This would be the same for points if we had assigned points to each place. Now that we've verified that our results are correct, we need to publish those results. The first way to publish the results is by going to the Rounds menu and clicking on Show Results in Event Portal. Now you may ask, why don't you just automatically show the results? We know that you want to check results, especially payouts, before anything would be shown to the public. So that checkbox is set to No by default. When you are ready to show the results on the portal, you change this to Yes, and now players will be able to view those results. So let's go take a look at that by going to the website and going to the leaderboard page and clicking on Tournament Results. Here we are. The players on this website would be able to see the same leaderboard we saw back on the manager site, and they have the same control. They can click on a player to see their individual scoring rack, etc. Now I said there's a couple ways to publish results, and now I'd like to show you my personal favorite way. Almost every club emails out the results as a PDF to their members at the end of play. Now this is a great thing to do because it gives all of the members of the club a way to view the results for the event, and it's convenient. It's right in their email. What I like to do, since we have these great websites, is I'll copy the URL directly to the leaderboard page. I'll head back to the manager site, and I'll go to the golfers menu, where I can send an email to the golfers. I'll check off all my players. I'll say, click here for tournament results. And I can highlight click here. I can click on add hyperlink. We'll paste that URL right into this box and we'll click OK. Now I'm going to send an email, just as I normally do, to all of the players in the field with the results of the day. However, if something would change on those results, or a payout would change, or I had to disqualify a player, I no longer need to resend a new email to those players to say, by the way, here are the new results, here's a new PDF, disregard the previous one. All they simply have to do is click on this link, and anytime they do, they're taken right to the live results that are current and correct at all times. So this is just one of the best practices we've seen from our current customer base that I wanted to pass along. So now that I've publicized the results, we've actually finished everything we had to do in our checklist. So now let's just recap what we've done today. In the pre-event prep, we created our event, we edited the settings, we edited the website, and we added our players. We then created our rounds, we created our pairings, and we added tournaments. In the check your work phase, we used the pre-play audit to check to make sure everything we'd done was accurate and worked properly. We used the handicap analysis to check that all of our handicaps were calculated correctly, and we used random scores to enter a random hole-by-hole gross score for every player in the field to check the leaderboards. Once we knew everything was set up correctly, we printed our materials, we then entered our scores for the event, completed the round, and viewed the leaderboard. Once we verified the results, we published them to the website and we sent them as an email. Now this wraps up what I wanted to cover in this training process today. Look forward to more training videos, and the biggest thing I can tell you is to actually go and create events. Work through the process, make mistakes, get stuck, access the help center, and work your way through it. If you can take some previous events that you've set up in TPP, work them through in the USGA Tournament Management product all the way through to results to make sure you get everything correct, you'll be on a great road to be ready for the upcoming tournament season. So for myself and everyone at Golf Genius, we look forward to working with you in the future, and good luck with all your events.